strictly essential. I like how they decide that, these websites, right? They're just like, here's a bunch of the cookies that you can opt out of. But these ones we need, okay? We need this information from you, or else this website will not work. The internet didn't exist before 2020. We need certain things. They went to the giant modem at the center of the earth and said, we'll give people the option. But without these important pieces of your identity, we can't survive. So this thing, I was going to say mean, but this piece of information circling the internet right now says, and this is demonetizable from the stratosphere down, is that the Spanish flu 1918 to 1920, I believe, anything to do with the war? I don't know. They're saying that, Dr. Fauci wrote a thing on it, and he found out that they didn't actually die from the flu. They actually died from masks. Now, that's the claim. The claim going around is that Dr. Fauci wrote something back in the day about the Spanish flu, and they found out it wasn't the Spanish flu killing people, but it was actually respiratory illnesses caused by masks. The lie detector determined that is a half-truth. The fact checkers of Andrew Says and Unauthorized Opinions determined that is a half-truth. Because, here's what it says. This is from 2008, and yes, it was written by Dr. Evil. Dr. Anthony Evil Fauci, I believe is his real name, and others. And they found, yes, indeed, the majority of deaths during the influenza pandemic of 1918 to 1919 were not caused by the influenza virus acting alone. Report researchers from the NIH, of course, and the NAID, the places that love you. Most victims succumb to bacterial pneumonia following influenza virus infection. So what does that sound like? That sounds a lot like comorbidities. Sounds a lot like a different thing that happened, but we won't name that because we're not bigots or bijos to be progressive about it. The pneumonia was caused when bacteria that normally inhabit the nose and throat invaded the lungs along a pathway created when the virus destroyed the cells that line the bronchial tubes and lungs. So now basically what they said happened was, yes, it destroyed the lining of the cells that line the bronchial tubes and lungs, and they didn't really have any antibiotics at the time, or vaccines, of course, to fight these things off. And that's what they're saying here. A future influenza pandemic may unfold in a similar manner, said the NIAID authors, whose paper in October 1st issue of the Journal of Infectious Diseases is now available online. Therefore, the authors conclude comprehensive pandemic preparations should include not only an effort to produce newer, improved influenza vaccines and antiviral drugs, but also provisions to stockpile antibiotics and bacterial vaccines as well. So they've been working on that goal. We need to buy a lot of vaccines for a long time, right? But that's the gist of it from the horse's mouth, from good old Dr. Fauci himself. Nowhere in the study, and we can bring up the full study, this was just the summary of it, does it say anything about masks? Does it say face coverings? So that part, I don't know where that part came from. I saw the claim. I couldn't find it anywhere. I mean, I don't think this shows up. I'm pressing Control F and typing in mask, and there's no mask, there's no face covering or anything. So that's not really true. I'd like to see where somebody found that from, but it's definitely not in, the summary of the study, the conclusion. I'll just go ahead and read the conclusion for you so there can be no discrepancies. It's basically the same thing. The majority of deaths likely resulted from the secondary bacterial pneumonia caused by common upper respiratory tract bacteria. Less substantial data from the subsequent 57 and 68 pandemics are consistent with these findings. If severe pandemic influenza is largely a problem of viral bacteria copathogenesis, pandemic planning needs to go beyond addressing the viral cause alone. Prevention, diagnosis, prophylaxis, and treatment of secondary bacterial pneumonia, as well as stockpiling of antibiotics, bacterial vaccines, should be a high priority for pandemic planning. So you can see, 1918, 1957, 1968, 2008, 2020. The plan is just buy more stuff. But the reality is, maybe he's right. Maybe buying more stuff prevents that stuff. Maybe having more of the stuff on hand prevents this stuff. There's no way to know that, and it just happens to be the stuff that they make money off of. But maybe. But when they say in 1918 this happened, and now in 2008 we know that it wasn't actually the 19, and I keep repeating the year, so maybe the YouTube algorithm will understand that I'm not talking about current times, but the 1918 Spanish flu and influenza outbreak, maybe that we know that this wasn't the primary cause of everything, and we could have prevented that by giving people antiviral drugs and whatever else, that maybe that means a similar thing happened where it wasn't exactly the Spanish flu that killed everybody. And maybe, I mean, this is known, right? This is known, but it's not spoken about, that people were either obese or sick with something else, an average of 4 comorbidities. And now we're looking back in 2008 and they're saying, well, actually, almost 100 years ago, it was also a comorbidity. And somebody was sick with one thing, the flu, and then it happened to result in a death from another thing. You know, people who were saying that in 2020 and 2021 were excommunicated from the church, let's say. And now it turns out that we sort of knew that that's what happens with these things. We sort of knew. I mean, they're saying in this 1918, 1957, and 1968, the pandemics are consistent with these findings, that it's not the same thing, or it's not the one thing. It tends to be something else. So you could say that the current schmaxine, how are we getting around this still? I don't know. Are we allowed to talk about it yet? I don't know. Maybe that was the thing to try to prevent other things from happening from you. But then, but then they kind of admitted that certain things didn't work. It didn't stop certain things. That's the thing. So they have their suggestion in 2008 that all 3 of these pandemics sort of turned out the same way, and we could stop it with, you know, certain antibiotics and bacterial vaccines, so and such and such. But then we tried that this time and it didn't really work. And we kind of said it was going to work. So who knows what the prevention is? Maybe 100 years ago they just didn't have. Maybe they just didn't have the technology we have today to survive something like this. I don't know. But this was written by Dr. Fauci. Again, no thing about masks. And the fact that they said here that the way they found this out was they examined the tissue specimens from 1918 to 1919 influenza fatalities and basically found out how they actually died, means it was never what they said it was in the first place, right? It was never actually a thing that they said it was. It might have been an outbreak, it might have been a ton of people having it, but it was never actually the thing they said it was. Kind of like now. I mean, isn't that the story of our time, though? Isn't that sort of how we're living right now? I think you could run for president on that slogan. What the government's telling us kind of isn't the thing that they said it was.
Turn it up, Jordan.